Good morning, everybody. We're going to call to order the meeting of the Montecito Planning Commission of November 19th, 2025. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. And begin.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we'll start with the TV coverage announcement. Mr. Martin.
Yes. The Montecito Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 1 p.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez, Santa Maria, and Orca areas. Rebroadcast of today's Montecito Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 10 a.m. and Sunday at 7 a.m. on CSB TV Channel 20. This hearing will also be streamed live on CSB TV's website and digitally archived and on the county's YouTube channel.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. And the roll call, please.
Yes, we'll start left to right. Commissioner Kupiec? Here. Commissioner Kearns?
Present.
Commissioner Americana?
Here.
Commissioner Miller?
Present.
And, Commissioner Larson Rockenbach.
Here.
Thank you.
And a special welcome to Commissioner Rockenbach, who was appointed to the commission earlier this month. Welcome to your first meeting. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
All right. The agenda status report, Mr. Wilson.
Oh, we have elections for vice chair.
So, Mr. Chair
Right.
and Commissioners, before we get to the agenda status report, there is an item on the agenda today for an election of a vice chair that is to replace Commissioner Sinauer, who has left her position at the commission. And so we would want to do that election now.
Yes.
I know there's a lot of hearings for that vice chair to be sitting in before the next year, and we do new elections in January. But we'll just go ahead and have those elections, Mr. Chair.
You're right. And I skipped over that item, so let's do the election of the new 2025 Montecito Planning Commission first vice chair, who will serve for this meeting and then serve for the December meeting. And in January, we'll have elections for both the chair and the vice chairs. So is there a nomination for the first vice chair? And you're welcome to nominate yourself if you are so inclined. I'm going to nominate, if I may, since I'm not hearing any nominations. Or Commissioner Kern, do you have a nomination?
Mr. Wilson, who is currently the second vice chair?
Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Sorry.
Kupiec.
Chair and Commissioners. Yeah, Commissioner Kupiec is the second vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Kubiak to be first vice chair.
All right. Is there a second for the nomination? Need a second?
I'll second.
All right. Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
It's unanimously approved. So we now have a vacancy in the position of the second vice chair. But it's not on the agenda.
It's not on the agenda.
I
So
know.
we'll do it next month.
We will do it next month.
Or Chair, we could just leave it vacant until January.
I should think that would be satisfactory. We have a chair and a first vice chair, and if we somehow need a second vice chair, we'll figure out how to solve that problem when we get to it. All right? Good. Now, agenda status report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. In regards to the status of our agenda today, we have one item on our standard agenda, which is a presentation by the Long Range Planning Division on ordinance amendments to be presented and considered by the Montecito Planning Commission today. And I can move to the projection report, Mr. Chair, if you'd like.
Yes, please do.
So we have one hearing left for this year, and that will be on December 17th. There's one item on that hearing, which is the Latin Trust Sports Court modification. So With that, we will conclude this year, and then we'll, as of right now, there is nothing projected for 2026. However, one item that is not on the projection report that we do want to bring to the commission's attention is that we're attempting to schedule the annual holiday luncheon for the commissions. That's where both the County Planning Commission and Montecito Planning Commission meet with staff for a holiday luncheon. And we're looking at 2 dates, December 10th and December 17th. I think we're trying to lean towards the 17th maybe, being that we're already going to have a hearing on that day. So if you just stay tuned for that date and location to be provided.
And do you know what time of day it'll be?
It'll be around lunchtime. So we usually break around 11:30 and go till like 1:30, and then
Okay. All right. Do you want to know now whether or not either of those dates is unavailable for any of the commissioners, or do you want to know that through an email chain? That we'll
If the
run?
commissioners have that information available right now, that would be great.
All right, and you said the 10th and the 17th? All right. Anybody have any conflict with either of those dates? Yeah, the 10th is not. 10th is not good for you?
No
All right.
conflicts.
You have a conflict on the 10th?
No conflicts.
No conflict. I have no conflicts. Marshall?
I have no conflicts.
Okay. Jan?
I also have a conflict on the 10th, but not the 17th.
Okay. It looks like the 17th is preferred here.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. That's good because we do have a hearing on the 17th, so.
Very good. Anything else on the projection report? No? All right. So, item 8 is public comment. Public comment period is set aside to allow the public testimony on items not on today's agenda. The time allocated to each speaker will be set at the discretion of the chair. Total time allocated for public comment is 15 minutes. When testifying before the Montecito Planning Commission, personal attacks and other disruptive behavior are not appropriate. Are there any requests for public comment?
Chair Americano, we have received no requests to speak for public comment, and we have nobody in our attendees column.
All right. Next item on the agenda is the Planning Commissioner's informational reports. Individual commissioners may present brief reports on planning issues, such as seminars, meetings, and literature that would be of interest to the public and/or commission as a whole. Any informational reports from members of the commission?
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
No, not from me.
No? Marshall?
No, no informational reports from me.
And Jan?
No, thank you.
All right. Minutes. The minutes of October 15th will be considered. They were distributed to the commission with the agenda for today's meeting. Any revisions or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, a motion would be in order to approve them.
So moved.
Motion's made. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Motion's made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Minutes are unanimously approved.
So, Mr. Chair, I assume that we have an abstention at the end. Thank you.
Yes,
assume
one,
you-
Our new commissioner is the
one
abstention.
abstention from me since I was not present at the October meeting.
Thank you for that. All right, so 4 ayes and 1 abstention. All right, Director's Report and Board of Supervisors hearing summary. Director Plowman, nice to see you again.
Nice
Welcome.
to see you, Commissioner Americaner, rest of Planning Commission, and welcome Ms. Rockenbach. Rockenbach?
Yes, that's correct. Rockenbach.
That's a good name. That's a good name. Welcome to the PC. We're happy to have you aboard. I want to give you an update on some recent activities. We had the Coastal Commission take action on the rezones for the housing element that were in the coastal zone 2 weeks ago. I was in Sacramento for that, and we got full unanimous support from the Coastal Commission to approve those. There are 3 rezones in the Carpinteria Valley and 1 in Isla Vista that were in the coastal zone. And we expect, they made some modifications to our amendment package, and that included increasing the level of affordability associated with the sites in Carpinteria from 20%, which was the minimum for them to take advantage of the ministerial process that's set forth by the state for rezone sites, and that got increased to 32%. And that was a cooperative effort with the landowners, the county, and the Coastal Commission. And they also required that all of those units remain affordable for the life of the project, which is great. Most of these affordable units do remain in affordability, but there are terms associated with like tax credit projects and whatnot that get turned over. But this is an extra layer of security that those units will always be affordable. So that was a really positive thing. And then they had, I think, one other minor change. So our next step is then to go to the board, bring that modification package to the board, and we're going to do that the first week in February. And then the board will take action, and then the Coastal Commission will take another action. We do this do-si-do with them, and then they will be in place. So it's very good news.
Congratulations.
Yeah. The board took a number of actions since we last met. One was the Coastal Commission had made some modifications to the cannabis ordinance that had been amended by the board to require carbon filtration and other types of similar technologies in the greenhouses in the Carpinteria Valley. And the board accepted those modifications in October of this year, October 21st. Those growers will be required to have the filtration systems installed in their greenhouses by March 18th. We have, or the board allowed for an extension process if there was trouble in getting units or something like that, like there was delays in shipping or manufacturing, and they have until December 18th to submit a request for that. On the 21st, the board also heard an item on the idle and orphaned wells in the county of Santa Barbara, the oil and gas wells. So we presented that information to sort of set the stage for their discussion of a future ordinance to prohibit oil and gas facilities and operations in the county of Santa Barbara. They took that item up following the idle and orphan wells, and the majority of the board directed the department to move forward with an ordinance prohibiting any drilling of new wells that hadn't already been permitted but not yet drilled. And that's phase one. The second phase would be a longer-term process where the county would embark on an amortization study so that we could assess whether or not the operators had reached their investment-backed expectations, and if they had not, what the time period would be when that would come to be true. Other jurisdictions are moving in this same direction. The city of Culver City, I should say, City of Los Angeles and County of Los Angeles have all taken steps to either adopt a program or are in the process of doing so. And then there'll be a full EIR on that phase, and so that'll take a couple of years for that second phase. They heard a building code update on the 4th of November, so our code updates, as mandated by the state, will be in place January 1. And then they also reheard the transfer of the Santa Ynez unit and what used to be called the All-American Plains Pipeline from Exxon to Sable also on the 4th, and the majority of the board denied the transfer of the ownership. So I'm sure there will be next steps involved. I don't know exactly what they are at this point, but I will keep both commissions apprised of what happens there. And then future board items, we have our departmental fee structure was put into place in 2017. And this is when the department moved to a full cost recovery model. And we are in the process of completing an overhaul of that fee study. And that is going to be going to the board on December 9th and December 16th. So we're greatly simplifying some of the fees. In the building department, we had very complex fee schedule that I think even our staff had trouble implementing accurately. So we're simplifying that and making sure that the department is following board policy and fully recovering costs that we can recover. There are certain things that the department does that the board gives general fund money for, and that includes all the long-range planning operations, except we do collect a general plan maintenance fee. And then things like enforcement, our public counter, and appeals, those are all things that are funded by the general fund. We will then have the board take up the package that you've already heard that was the housing element related amendments, and that'll be on the 16th of December. And then findings for denial of the transfer of ownership are coming back to the board on the 16th for Sable. And that's all I have to report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for our director? Not seeing any.
Okay. That
Great
was easy.
report. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, have a great day.
You too. All right, item 12, waive public hearing. County of Santa Barbara intends to waive the required public hearing for the proposed coastal development permit for a new single-family dwelling at 2025 Creekside Road. The applicant's name is Mathewson. Is there any staff report or input on this item before we go to a vote?
So just jumping in, because unless Secretary Wilson wants to add something. So that is on your agenda just as a supplemental notification. There's no action for the Planning Commission to take. It's really just a notice to the public with instructions if someone would like to request a hearing, they need to do so in writing by the date on the agenda, which is December 1st. And if someone did request a hearing, it would come to the Montecito Planning Commission. But as for today, there's no action to take. It's just acknowledge it and move on, I would think.
Very good. Any questions from the commission on this item? No? All right. Item 13, the standard agenda, item number 1.
Yep. I will read that into the record.
Please do.
Okay, item number 1, 25 ORD-00010, 25 ORD-00011, and 25 ORD-00013, 2025 General Ordinance Amendment Package. Hearing on the request of the County of Santa Barbara Planning and Development Department, P&D, for the Montecito Planning Commission to consider recommending that the County Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors adopt an ordinance, case number 25 ORD-00011, case number 25 ORD-00010, and case number 25 ORD-00013, determine that the ordinances are exempt from the provisions of CEQA pursuant to section 15061, subsection B-3, and 15061, B-3 and 15265 of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Very good. And staff report from Deputy Director Tuttle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Alex Tuttle with Long Range Planning. And here to present to you today is Karina Martin, who will walk through the presentation, and then at the end will be available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Martin.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'm just going to give staff a moment to pull up the presentation. But again, for the record, my name is Karina Martin, and this morning I will be giving the presentation on the 2025 General Ordinance Amendment Package for your Commission's consideration. So the purpose of today's hearing is to recommend approval of a General Ordinance Amendment Package that is before you today, and it is to add provisions to exempt events such as art, garden, and architectural tours. It's also to implement revisions to state density bonus provisions that are already existing in the Montecito Land Use and Development Code, as well as the Coastal Zoning Ordinance. And it's to repeal the Montecito Growth Management Ordinance, which is under Chapter 35 zoning of the Santa Barbara County Code, but codified under Chapter 35B. And finally, it's to initiate minor amendments to correct, clarify, or simplify existing provisions, requirements, and definitions. So starting with the art, garden, and architecture tours, the proposed provisions will facilitate temporary community events such as art, garden, and architectural tours that are organized by civic, educational, service institutions, or organizations that are directly engaged in civic and charitable efforts. I'll just note that there are already similar provisions in the Land Use and Development Code that were adopted by the board back in May of this year. And the proposed amendments essentially will expand the list of the temporary uses in the temporary use sections of the Coastal Zoning Ordinance and in the MLUDC to exempt art, garden, and architecture tours from a planning permit, but still be subject to specific standards. And those would include standards such as limiting these events to 4 times a year, but no longer than 3 days per event, that these events be open to the general public with or without ticket sales, and up to 300 attendees. And for any receptions or parties that are associated with these events, that they be limited to non-residential zones. Now moving on to state density bonus law. This is a state mandate that allows developers higher density as well as other incentives in exchange for building affordable housing. And on September 24th of last year, Assembly Bill 3116 was signed into law, which added additional benefits for student housing developments, such as defining student housing development containing 2 or more bed spaces, as well as establishing parking ratios for student housing developments, which essentially would require no parking if the project qualifies under state density bonus law. And the bill also includes incentives or concessions for projects with at least 23% low-income affordability. So the proposed amendments would update the existing standards in the Coastal Zoning Ordinance and MLUDC to comply with Assembly Bill 3116. Now moving on to the Montecito Growth Management Ordinance, or also known as the MGMO. The MGMO implements provisions that are intended to pace development in conjunction with services and resources available in the Montecito Community Plan area. It was originally adopted by the board back in March of 1991, as well as being part of Phase 1 of the Montecito Community Plan. It has been extended over a series of years, but was most recently extended in 2010 and was extended to have a deadline of December 31st of 2030. And then on October 9th of 2019, Senate Bill 330 was codified into law under Government Code Section 66300B1B. And it states that cities and counties shall not enforce any moratorium or similar restriction or limitation on housing development. The MGMO is a restriction or limitation on housing development, so it therefore does not comply with state law, specifically with Senate Bill 330. And staff is formally proposing to repeal the MGMO and remove it from the county code in accordance with state law requirements, as well as implementing Program 16 of the Housing Element Update. And I'd also just like to note that the MGMO is currently not being enforced or implemented. Now moving on to the other minor amendments, starting with the MLUDC. The first proposed amendment is to simplify front yard setback requirements for corner lots to essentially end up with a single standard regardless of the lot being greater than or less than 100 feet in width. It also amends the accessory structures and use sections in the resource management zone to allow garages and carports to resolve a code conflict that currently requires covered parking but does not allow garages. It also corrects a subsection error in the telecom ordinance. It clarifies the number and category of ADUs that are permitted on a lot. It also clarifies that floor area calculations are in gross square feet and not net for consistency. And finally, the proposed amendments revise the lot interior definition to remove unnecessary language referring to subdivisions. And there are similar amendments that were also being carried over into the CZO. So I won't focus on those. I'll only focus on the changes that are specifically related to the coastal zone. So the proposed amendments will incorporate existing practices such as initial application review. These are existing practices that are already in place in the LUDC and MLUDC. It's also to add a definition for flood control, which is consistent with the Gaviota Coast Plan overlay. The definition for major public works project and major energy facility definition is being revised to comply with Coastal Commission regulations. And there's also an amendment to clarify the total setback for plant protection structures on lots containing 5 or more acres to be 60 feet, of a total of 60 feet or 80 feet, respectively. Staff corrected this language to add the 80 feet, which is not shown on attachment D1 in your packet. But staff is recommending that the commission add this minor change to further the intent of the provision in the recommended actions. And I also have a slide at the end of this presentation that I can refer to about that minor change. Additionally, the minor amendments update the mobile home park conversion noticing requirements to reference the Civil Code section. And finally, the amendments clarify that for lots greater than 12,000 square feet, that up to 750 square feet of an attached 3-car garage is not included in the floor area ratio calculation. And I'll just clarify that that is specific to the Summerlin area or overlay, and that is to be consistent with the existing Summerlin architectural guidelines. So the proposed amendments to the MLUDC and coastal zoning ordinance are recommended to be determined exempt from environmental review, as they would not result in any new significant impacts or increase the severity of previously considered impacts. As a result, no new environmental document is required pursuant to CEQA guidelines sections 15061B3 and 15265. So the recommendations for today's ordinance amendments can be found on page 1 through 2 of the staff report dated November 10th, which is before you. And to summarize, they are to make the required findings for approval, including the CEQA findings found in attachment A to the staff report, as well as to determine that the proposed MLUDC and coastal zoning ordinance amendments and repeal of Chapter 35B are exempt from the provisions of CEQA. And finally, to adopt a resolution and recommend approval of the MLUDC amendments, the repeal of Chapter 35B found in attachment C and in E, as well as to make a recommendation to the County Planning Commission that the board adopt the coastal zoning ordinance amendments as revised during today's hearing found in attachment D, as well as on the next slide. And before I conclude with the presentation, I'll just show the 80 feet in red font and then comma respectively. That was added to further the intent of the provision. And that concludes staff's presentation, and staff is here available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Are there questions from the commission for staff?
I have a long list, but I'm happy to have someone else start off.
Anybody else want to start?
I only have one question, and maybe you'll ask, so.
Is your mic on?
I do have one question, and it's seeking clarification on the Affordable Housing Act, the additional benefits for student housing. In the Montecito plan area, would that include the Westmont campus? Or campus area?
Commissioner Kearns, through the chair, theoretically, if Westmont were to construct student housing and provide that percentage of affordability as required under state law, then they could take advantage of those requirements. It's a little complicated with Westmont because they do operate under a CUP. And so, and there's requirements under their CUP for certain, like, regarding parking and things of that nature, if that's kind of what you're wondering about.
Thank you, that clarifies.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions before we get to Commissioner Miller and his long list?
I have 3 questions.
All right.
First, on the garden art and architecture tours part of the presentation, clarification, is it 4 times per year per organization that would be seeking to hold those events, or 4 times per year total?
Commissioner Rockenbach, through the chair, that would be correct. It would be per organization, 4
Okay.
times a year.
And then a follow-up question on that would be, are there any provisions related to parking or transportation that are included in what's being proposed that would accommodate parking needs and transportation needs for events of that size and that frequency?
Commissioner Rockenbach, through the chair. For these events, because they're going to be exempt, there are no specific requirements related to parking or transportation. They would still have to comply with the normal city parking, standards that are already in place. So, for example, a car can't just go park in random parking lots. They would have to comply with the standards that are already set. But the intent of these tours is to be in different locations where someone may go and park in one location, then either walk or drive to a different location to continue on to their tour. So they're not expected to have high concentrations in one specific area or one specific street where we see parking being an issue. For events that maybe are hosting large amounts of individuals, those need to obviously accommodate, if they're going to host the event, they need to accommodate space for parking or to be able to hold that many or that amount of people. But the tours themselves would not, or I should back up. Any reception or large party will follow a different type of, or would fall under a different type of use and wouldn't be related to the tour itself. Those would also not be allowed in residential zones. So as I mentioned on the presentation, they're limited to non-residential zones. So they would typically be areas that would have a parking lot already in place that they can facilitate such amount of vehicles.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And then one question related to the discussion about the MGMO. If that were not to be repealed, is there a negative impact to the county or to the regional housing element? For example, I saw a reference in the packet to Program 16, which seems to recommend that it be removed, but it doesn't speak to whether there's a consequence if it's not removed.
Commissioner Rockenbach, through the chair. So last year, 2023 maybe, the board did adopt the housing element update, which included Program 16, which directed staff to repeal the MGMO because it does not comply with state law, and it's also a limitation on development. So in order for us to comply with state law, which is SB 330, and as well as implementing Program 16, we are directed to remove the MGMO.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a question.
Mr. Kupiec.
Can you clarify a little bit?
Mr.
about what the-
Kupiec, I'm sorry, can you just move your mic closer to you? Thank
Sorry.
you.
Can you clarify a little bit when there is the incentives that are being provided for increasing the percentage of affordable housing in some of these projects? Can you clarify a little bit what those incentives are? Are we talking about height, bulk, and scale issues?
Commissioner Kupiec through the chair. So normally with a project that comes in under state density bonus, in exchange for providing a certain percentage of the units in affordable to very low, low, and in some cases moderate income categories, sort of two or three things occur. One is they get a density bonus, hence the name, so they can do additional density beyond what the underlying zoning would normally allow. Second thing is they can ask for incentives or waivers or concessions, and those typically take the form of, say, an increase in height above what the zoning would normally allow, or maybe a reduction in a setback. So it's typically waivers or incentives that give them some relief from ordinance requirements that would otherwise be imposed or applied.
And how do those waivers get approved or disapproved?
Well, as part of the permit for the project, they get approved.
By who?
Whoever the decision maker is. So if it's a project that is under the discretion or jurisdiction of the planning commission, then it would be the planning commission that would take action on those requests for incentives or waivers. So it's whoever the decision maker is on that permit.
But it would be an adjudicating body. It would be a commission.
Not necessarily.
necessarily.
Some projects are under the discretion or jurisdiction of the director. Others,
For example, to grant additional height.
it could be the director or a decision-making body such as the commission. I will say there's state law is very, there's limitations on the ability to reject or disallow incentive requests. You're pretty boxed in.
We're
as
all
to-
becoming well aware of that.
Yes. So, yeah, hopefully that answers your question. on
Yes,
that.
it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the art garden and architecture tours, there was discussion that this was already adopted in May of 2025. This body didn't meet at that point, so I'm a little, could we have a little more guidance as to its adoption?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, when I referenced that it was previously adopted, it's adopted in the inland area. The board adopted the similar provisions already into the LUDC back in May of 2025. It didn't go before your commission. It was presented to the county planning commission because it's inland. It was approved in Montecito.
So is it appropriate to understand that this is currently active in the inland part of Montecito as adopted by the county planning commission?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, no, it is not permitted currently in the Montecito Community Plan area or in the coastal zone. It's only the unincorporated inland area of the county,
Outside of Montecito.
outside of Montecito.
Okay, thank you for the clarification on that. And then could you, I am struggling a little bit around enforcement and definition in this category. In that one person's garden tour might be another person's wedding, in terms of a whole bunch of people showing up and having a love, like how should we understand, how does enforcement work as to like whether or not these people showing up are indeed students of architecture or landscape architecture and not receptioning, for lack of a better term?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, I think it's important to recognize the fact that already under the code and has been in place for quite some time is the ability for a property to hold receptions and events on a limited temporary basis throughout the year, particularly if they're charitable events or the property owner is not receiving compensation for the event. So already an estate in Montecito could hold throw a wedding for their daughter or son and have 300 guests attend. So this program or this code amendment is not changing that. That's already an existing allowance in the code. So really what we're talking about is tours. And just if it provides a little context, the reason this came to be is it was driven by the San Ynez Valley, had a long history of a very active arts culture in San Ynez Valley where museums or different groups would host these art tours where you'd purchase a ticket for the tour. You'd get like a list of 10 or 15 different properties around the valley who would participate. It's mostly people who do sculptures or painting or some sort of artistry out of their homes. They open their homes up. People can kind of tour around from site to site, give a chance for that artist to get some exposure with their wares, give the chance for the community to go, purchase some art around the valley. And then some of the events or tours would end at the museum where they'd host some sort of reception at the end. And so that was a practice that had been going on for years and years until ultimately it was determined, someone complained, and they determined that it was not an allowed use under the zoning at the time. And so there was a push to update our code to allow for those types of like civic tours. Here in the city of Santa Barbara, you've probably seen where they do like garden tours or like architecture tours, where again, you get like a map of various homes that want to show off their gardens or their architecture, and you kind of tour around from site to site. It's usually self-guided, and then maybe there's a reception at the end. So that was sort of the driving force for this allowance, and it is structured and written into the code that it is intended for tours that are hosted or put on by like a civic organization or institution or some sort of charitable function. So it's not intended for just someone who wants to throw a party at their home. There's a requirement that it be open to the public. So it's not a private event, so anyone could come and participate with or without a ticket. And then there's, other standards that would be applied as well. So in terms of enforcement, these would be exempt uses. The only times we would really ever hear about them is if there were some kind of a complaint, much like our enforcement works, at which point we would investigate if necessary. But that's kind of, that's the impetus for this. The reason it was brought forward in the inland area outside of Montecito initially was because that's where the desire was for the San Ynez Valley particularly. But we did say at the time last spring that we'd come back and carry it over to the Montecito and coastal zone as well at a later date. So here we are.
So I worry that this becomes a tool for fighting without accomplishing a tremendous amount within Montecito. So I just want to make sure I'm, first of all, understanding how it works. Number one is it is the nature of the nonprofit entity that is limited to 4. So that at the Kubiak estate, if the Amerikaner Foundation holds 4 events, but then the Rockenbach Foundation has another 4 events, the Kubiak estate has not broken the rules.
That's not entirely correct.
Okay.
No. So I want to make sure you're distinguishing between an event at someone's house or estate versus art, garden, or architecture tour. The distinction is these are tours where you're getting a list of properties. You're going kind of from one place to another. You get sort of a self-guided map, so to speak, as opposed to someone just throwing a party. As I said, there's already an allowance in the code for people to throw host events or receptions at their property with certain limits on the number of people, the number of occasions throughout the year. They can't receive compensation, and that will continue to apply regardless of this current change.
So I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be difficult. But there's an amazing architecture tour of the Kubiak estate and the Villa Lobos estate. And so we're driving around and admiring the homes. The enforcement is against Villa Lobos estate for having too many of these events, or the enforcement is against the Amerikaner Foundation, the nonprofit who is hosting the tours, or I'm still trying to get my hands around like
It could be
the limit
both.
to 4 we were told is an institutional or nonprofit level.
The complaint or enforcement could be against both. For one, if you are organizing, putting on, hosting the event or the tour, and you do more than 4, then that's a violation on the promoter or the organization. If you are one of the properties that the tour is going around to from site to site, and you're inviting more people to your property for reasons other than an art, garden, or architecture tour, then that could be a violation as well. There is a limit to no more than 25 people at any one time as part of the tour. So it's really, and typically the way these are structured is, again, you might get a list of 10 or 15 or 20 participating properties. Because it's self-guided, the people who have the tickets, the 300, are usually kind of spread out, and there's not like, you're not going in any single uniform flow of property to property. So the intention is it's dispersed. There'd never be more than 25 people at any one of those properties throughout the event or throughout the tour. So it's not creating an avenue for someone to host a party or an event at their home. They're just opening their home or opening their property to some passerbys, some passers-by.
Can I dovetail in here for a second?
Sure.
So I'm not sure how this number of 25 occurs, because, I know the American Institute of Architects does ArchiTours. There are my house has been on the Pearl Chase tour, and I can assure you we've had more than 25 people touring our house at any given time on that day. ArchiTours sells well more than 300 tickets to their event, some of which could occur in Montecito. The number seems kind of arbitrary. If I'm a 10-acre property, whether there's 25 people or 75 people doesn't really make much of a difference. So I'm just kind of curious. The number seems rather arbitrary in terms of limiting people to a particular site.
Could we take a step back? Can you give us a sense about how often these tours happen in Montecito or even outside of Montecito? I don't have any sense of how big or small this land use issue is, and maybe you can give us a sense of that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, so as I indicated, the driving force was the San Ynez Valley and these art tours that were occurring in the valley. I don't get a sense that there's a strong desire or demand for art tours, people doing art out of their homes in Montecito. There may be the garden tour, the architecture tour, which is kind of why we broadened it from just art tours specifically, because it's kind of the similar type of civic engagement opportunities or community opportunities. And I do know and am aware of those that occur in the city through like the architecture and garden tours. I haven't heard really of the frequency or any significant large demand for these outside of the valley. I think those that do occur under the radar, and they don't seek permits. They just do their events, and no one's typically the wiser, and everyone enjoys their time and experience.
Yeah, I've lived in Montecito for over 40 years. I only know of one regular art or architecture tour that takes place, and I'm not even sure who sponsors it. It must be a local association of artists, and they get their artists who work from home to open up their home and their art collection and studio to the public visiting on a Saturday afternoon for 3 hours. And people get a map and they drive around from place to place and they park in front of the artist's house and they go in for a little while and they come back out again. And I've been to a few of the houses and there may be a half a dozen people there at any given time. It's a fairly low intensity type of event. And that's my only personal experience with it. And that's why I asked the question as to whether or not this use, this activity in Montecito is bigger than we think it is, or causing impacts that we don't know about, or if there's some other issue here that we should be focused on that requires our attention. Just like your sense of that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. And I think your experience is the typical experience, that these are things that have been happening for years. And it's just, we're just putting it in the code just so that if any questions come up, we can point to the code and say it's an allowed use. We're not hearing a lot of people banging down the door asking for these, so I don't think you're gonna suddenly see some big change in the frequency or size of these activities. I think they will continue to just sort of be pretty infrequent and kind of fly under the radar. That would be my my guess, but
Unless artists suddenly go crazy and do these things, which hard to anticipate. Yes.
Follow-up question. What is the current process if someone wanted to do an event like this, since it's currently not in the code specific to Montecito?
So currently, what was discovered in the San Ynez Valley when we looked into it is because there was ticket sales and so there was compensation being received, they did not qualify under the charitable event temporary category, which does not allow for compensation or exchange of money. So determined that it would be a minor CUP, which for that organization was just too heavy of a lift for them to have to go through that. So they just ceased hosting those events. And so the same would be in Montecito. If there was any compensation or exchange of dollars involved, then it would not fall under that charitable event category and would be a minor CUP.
I also have a follow-up question. In Montecito, what is the code or ordinance then that would prohibit someone from having, I'll call it a pay-to-play, like renting their home for wedding receptions once a month? And it's not a family member once a month. Is there an ordinance that prohibits that?
Commissioner Kearns to the chair. So renting out your home for a wedding? Is that your question?
Yes, some kind of event where you're collecting a fee from whoever's renting your home.
Yeah, there would be regulation against that. If you're just renting it out for the weekend, it gets a little complicated in terms of, but if it's just you're renting it out for the weekend so someone can host an event and you're receiving compensation for that, then yeah, then it would not be allowed under the current code.
And is there a section in the code that you could refer me to?
Well, I would refer you to the temporary use section of the code that
Perfect.
outlines the types of reception events that can occur, which are those where there's it's charitable in nature and there's no remuneration.
Perfect,
received.
that's very helpful. I see that as a more common trend in Montecito in the past few years. So I was just curious what the code section was, so thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Miller, back to your questions.
Thank you. My next section was on this student housing piece. If this is, you made reference to the idea that that this is a change in state law, but that Westmont and the other places, there's the, am I correct that the Pacifica Graduate School Institute is in our jurisdiction? And then I was curious about if they're subject to CUPs, but is state law overriding those CUPs, as we are about to discuss a little further down in the Montecito Growth Ordinance? How should we understand this student housing question, number one? And my follow-up question is because there's an affordable housing element to it, would that ever come before this body, or would that be because would that go to the County Planning Commission as the Miramar project did?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, so the student housing, in order to qualify under this state provision, and by the way, whether we amend our code or not, the state law is the state law, so someone can avail themselves of this opportunity regardless of whether our code is updated or not. So I don't think it's sort of a friendly way of saying you don't really have a lot of discretion here with that.
That's very much an appreciated comment.
With that particular one. But again, in order to qualify, that project does have to provide that percentage of affordable units. I don't see many universities or colleges or institutions setting aside college-sponsored student housing as affordable units. Most of these would be like a private developer developing a student housing complex outside of a university where it's where they can set aside affordable units. But if a project at Westmont or Pacific Graduate Institute were to come in and it met the standards, then we would be processing it subject to that. As to your second question about the jurisdiction, I don't have an answer for you on that.
So what I'm trying to understand here is that Westmont's currently subject, the CUP has a pretty hard cap on the total number of students.
Correct, and that cap would remain in place.
So in a hypothetical world where they built 2,000 units of student housing, just to kind of make the absurd point, they could have housing for way more students than the CUP would allow them to have on campus, or they could be on campus per state law, but they can't take classes? How do I understand the interaction of what we're saying here with this CUP student body cap?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, they are subject to a CUP. They have a limit on, I think it's 1,200, rolling average of 1,200 students a year. And that would not change from this measure. So, and they also have requirements in terms of like the amount of housing for students on campus versus off campus. And so they have a lot of limitations placed on their operations. These provisions would have no bearing or impact on their current limits under their CUP. So I can't really foresee a situation where Westmont would be coming in trying to take advantage of this.
Permit me to ask Commissioner Miller's question another way. The 1,200 student cap, that's a cap on enrollment, is it not?
Correct.
It's not a cap on the number of students living on campus. It's not, there's no separate rule having to do with the numbers who live on campus versus off campus versus commuters. That's not part of it. The 1,200 student cap is on enrollment. Is that right?
That is correct. The 1,200 cap is on enrollment. It's been a while since I've looked at their CUP, but I did process their last major amendment about 15 years ago. So digging deep into the recesses of my memory, if I recall, there were also some restrictions on like the number of students that would be living off campus. There's also limits on like their average daily trips to and from campus and their parking requirements on campus. So They're under a lot of restrictions that this change to the ordinance would not change.
Very good. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Next question is, there was a discussion of the Summerland overlay and the size of garages. Is there a place where the Summerland overlay overlaps with the Montecito Planning District? Like,
No,
do those two bubbles ever ven?
they do not. You have your Montecito Community Plan, and then you have your Summerlin Community Plan, and they touch, but they don't overlap.
Okay, so this was a FYI for us more than a,
Well, it's in the coastal zoning ordinance, which you are taking an action to recommend to the County Planning Commission, but it will have no bearing on Montecito.
okay. And then my final set of questions are around, that are a follow-up on Commissioner Rockenbach's question, around if we fail to adopt the change to the Montecito growth ordinance language, state law will still override that. Am I correct? That is my understanding. But my question is that we are currently talking about changing the Montecito code without changing the Montecito general plan today. If we leave that in place, it won't be active. It will be superseded by state law, but if state law changes in the future, I will call it the anti-growth posture of Montecito would then come back into enforcement, into being. Is that a correct understanding of the situation? And if this is a question better directed to County Council, I'm happy to take it there.
Commissioner Miller through the chair. So currently we are not enforcing or applying the MGMO. And if it gives you any comfort, I was asking some of our staff who've been managing our MGMO for the last 10 or so years. And even though it's been in place, or when it was in place and we were actually managing it, we were never hitting the cap. So I can't remember the last time we were actually denying allocations because the growth was exceeding what was in place with the growth management ordinance. So even though it's been in place for years, it hasn't really had any effect on the pace of growth in the Montecito area. But we have not been enforcing it since the state law was in effect. Our housing element does have a program to amend our code to formally suspend it or repeal it. If the county were to decide to keep it on the books but just continue to not enforce it, it is something we have to report on our progress on an annual basis to the state in terms of following through on our actions of our housing element and all of our implementing our various programs. So we would have to report on the fact that we have not taken action to formally remove it from our code. And it's hard to know whether or not that would become a point of concern on the part of the state. But it is certainly a lot cleaner to just get it off the books because of its conflict with state law.
And I do understand what you were saying in that regard. My concern as a commissioner is that we are not necessarily doing a review of the general plan, and that I understand why bringing the code into alignment with state law makes sense from a legal sanitary kind of keep it clean and straightforward perspective. But my concern here is that that the Montecito community has a strong opinion on this matter as vocalized through the general plan, and that in a scenario in the future in which state law changed, that it would require the re-implementation of the code, of this code, to then once again match the general plan. I'm wanting, if we vote to not recommend this section, are we creating a challenge for the county government and/or the countywide housing plan if we just leave this as a vestigial piece of code that exists in case state law in the future changes. I think that is the essence of my question.
Through the chair, Commissioner Marshall, maybe I can take a stab at responding, and I think
Thank you. Yes, please.
the planning department will have further thoughts. But one thing to remember is that what the commission is doing today is making a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, and ultimately it will be the Board of Supervisors that decides whether to repeal this ordinance. If you wanted your recommendation to include some language that isn't currently in the resolution, you could ask the board to kind of, I don't know, consider recommending that staff return in the event that state law changes and they want to enact a new ordinance, or you could recommend that the board not repeal the ordinance. And ultimately, if the board did that, I think there are consequences, just like staff said, we'd have to provide that information to the state. And there's also provisions in state law that allow interested parties to challenge in court the county if it's not complying with its own housing element requirements. So I think there would potentially be ramifications if the board decides not to repeal the ordinance. We don't know exactly what those are, but if this body wants to make recommendations to the board, that's within your discretion.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. So my line of questioning and thought around this is a vote to, or a decision to decline to recommend the change to the county with the explanation that we understand that state law already supersedes this and that this is a dormant piece of DNA, a non-active bit of law. But with the idea that it would be there in a latent fashion if state law changed in the future, and that reflects that this is not a change being driven by the local community or desired by the local community, but rather an imposition of state law. And so if state law were to change, presumably the desires and wills of the local community would be appropriately manifest again.
So let me ask a related question, if I may.
Please.
Does the Montecito Community Plan include the policy reflected in the Montecito Growth Management Ordinance? Does it have a provision in it that authorizes or requires a growth management ordinance of the kind adopted in 1991?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, not that I'm aware of, but we're going to take a quick look.
Okay. And let me just follow up that question with a comment for
Certainly.
my fellow commissioners. In my mind, at least, leaving an ordinance on the books that, number one, violates state law, and number two, hasn't been used in many, many years because the level of development in the community doesn't trigger it, is a little like endorsing vampire legislation, something that sleeps until suddenly it wakes. I don't think that's particularly great policy. I think if state law changes and the community of Montecito in the future feels that a growth management ordinance is important and should be pursued, then that's a conversation that should take place with the people making the laws at that time, sitting on this commission, sitting at the Board of Supervisors. I would think that we would want to clear out the dead underbrush from our code now and leave it to the future decision makers to decide if this is a good idea or a bad idea. So I'm in favor of the proposal from the staff to remove the growth management ordinance from the books, recognizing that in the future, as Commissioner Miller has suggested, this may turn out to be something that the community wants and supports and urges the Board of Supervisors to adopt.
Chair and Commissioners, I did just want to remind you that the MGMO is set to expire December 31st, 2030. So there is a sunset date for it already.
So it's not just a vampire, it's a vampire that's actually going to expire in
Yes.
5 years.
That would be
Okay.
correct.
Got a stake through its heart already.
Well, thank you for that reminder. I appreciate it. That is some of my questions, Director.
Very good. That was a very, very helpful set of questions. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from commissioners on the presentation from staff or on the recommendation from staff as reflected at the end of the staff report? No? No? All right. We have anything further from staff before we move on to the motion that's on the table? I'm sorry?
Public comment.
Oh, of course. Yes. Appreciate the reminder. So having answered all the questions from the staff, is there any public comment, either in person or online?
Chair Americano, we have received no letters, and we have nobody online or in person.
All right, then. Public comment period is closed, and we will move to action on the item, unless there are other comments from commissioners. All right, and if you would just, Ms. Martin, if you would remind us what we are being asked to do this morning.
Chair and Commissioners, we're just going to give staff a moment to pull up the PowerPoint one more time.
I do have
And
one
then it'll be
question,
slide
Chair.
14.
Going to
Okay,
deliberation? or-
hold on 1 second. We have a question from a commissioner.
Just one clarification as to whether we would have the answer about whether the resolution that's being proposed is consistent with the Montecito Community Plan before we would vote.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, what I can tell you is that the Montecito Growth Management Ordinance actually preceded the adoption of the community plan. So the Growth Management Ordinance was adopted in 1991. The community plan was adopted in 1992. There is reference in the community plan to the fact that phase one of developing the community plan included a growth management ordinance, but there's no policies really specific to the growth management plan or managing growth in the community that repeal of the growth management ordinance would create a notable conflict with. And just as a reminder, we aren't proposing any amendments to the community plan. So the community plan and its policies related to sort of the low-intensity nature of desired development in Montecito would continue to remain in effect.
So this action this morning does not involve any amendment or proposed amendment to the community plan? All right.
Correct.
All right, so just a reminder of what the recommended actions are before we move to a motion and then a second and then discussion on the motion. Ms. Martin?
Chair and Commissioners, I just wanted to quickly respond to you, Commissioner Rockenbach. So the resolution will be revised. So the one that is attached does not reference the minor edit that I was showing on this page, but in your in your motion, you will include that we will be revising the resolution to include this minor edit. So again, the recommended actions are to make the required findings for approval, to determine that case number 25 ORD 10, 11, and 12 are both exempt, or all three are exempt from the provisions of CEQA. And then it's to adopt a resolution recommending approval as revised during this hearing, to make a recommendation to the County Planning Commission for the coastal zoning ordinance amendments, and then make a recommendation to the board to adopt, to adopt the amendments to the MLUDC as well as the repeal of the Montecito Growth Management Ordinance.
Very good. All right, that's the proposed action. A motion would be in order to approve the actions as recommended by staff. Is there such a motion? From the board?
I would move to separate these out, to be three separate motions so that we can, we're approving the arts, garden, and architecture tours as separate from the state density bonus law and the Montecito growth management ordinance. Is that a
Chair-
difficult thing to do,
Chair-
or is this a Gordian knot?
Chair Americana, Commissioners, so you can't do that, but you could separate out the ordinance repealing Chapter 35B, the Montecito Growth Management Ordinance, is a separate document than the ordinance or than the amendment to the MLUDC, which the amendment to the MLUDC and the coastal zoning ordinance include the art garden tours, the state density bonus, and the other minor amendments. So those are all pretzeled together. You can't separate those out. It's a single action for that ordinance package. The MGMO could be a separate action. If you have recommendations particular to some of the elements of that package, you could make those clear in your recommendation. But you can't really take separate actions for those different subsets of ordinance amendments.
All right, so if your goal is to separate out a particular issue from the package, my suggestion is that the motion be to concur with the recommendations of staff, except, and then phrase the scope of your exception to carve out the change that you would like to not include, if that's clear.
It is.
All right.
So and maybe this is more in a pre-motion, but kind of commission discussion.
Well, I'd like to have discussion after we have a motion
Okay.
on the floor.
Then I'll make a motion to approve these recommended actions, but a carve out for the garden, art, and architecture tours to be not included or revisited. That's my motion.
All right, that's the motion that's on the floor. Is there a second for that motion? Okay. No second for the motion. Is there another motion that a commissioner wants to make?
I would move to approve the staff recommendation as set forth, including the minor amendment that isn't included on this page.
All right. That's the motion. Is there a second?
I would second that.
All right. Motion's on the floor for discussion. Is there discussion on the motion?
My concern as it relates to the garden tour piece is that this issue was kind of designed around the San Ynez Valley and not around Montecito. I think Commissioner Kubiak raised some valuable points about this type of tour structure has an odd interplay with the city of Santa Barbara. That if you're touring 4 houses in Montecito and 4 houses in the city and you sell 600 tickets, is that a code violation or not? It's not that I don't. I think that this. I'm in favor of having an ordinance like this, but I'm in favor of Montecito being drafted to being more in touch and in conversation with our community and the types of tours we have. I'm worried that we are about to pass something that the existing but non-compliant events may be in violation of. And I don't have a good sense, aside from Commissioner Kubiak's comments, that he is aware of an event that would already be in violation but seems to be functioning well.
Well, and it's been functioning for the last at least 23 years.
Right.
I've lived here without any consequence. So I mean, I don't know. This is talking about vampire legislation. But,
So,
you know.
I guess my thought is that not that this shouldn't be in place, but that the limits and the numbers and the interaction between jurisdictions be considered for Montecito, which frankly just faces different dynamics and questions than the San Ynez Valley does.
Then I do have a question, since I think the only part of that ordinance is this imaginary number. So what if someone came to you for a permit and knew that at any given site location, the population might exceed 25 people? What would happen? How would government respond to that as an issue?
Commissioner Kupiec through the chair. So the number 25, just so you know where that came from, that's a current number in our code for people who have artist studios on their premises where they're able currently, if you have a functioning permitted artist studio, to open it up to the public 4 times a year with no more than 25 members of the public coming.
But this ordinance is cast out for other kinds of
that is
events
true.
as well,
So
not
the-
just the 25 people coming to my house to look at my painting.
So currently, as I mentioned, that type of activity would require a minor CUP. Under minor CUP provisions, there wouldn't necessarily be a limit as to the size of the function. It could be determined on a project-by-project basis.
Well, I think your language should probably reflect that. That it's kind of site-specific.
What we're saying is these are the parameters for an exempt level of temporary use. If you don't meet the way our ordinance is structured, if you don't meet the levels for an exempt use, then you can pursue other options. So
So a
the
greater
numbers,
number could be considered.
a greater number could be considered, but it just wouldn't be exempt. But I also don't, I mean, as you pointed out, you know, these types of events have occurred for years and continue to occur. Generally, no one,
And rarely have a permit.
yeah. And so, you know, it's one of those things where try not to shine too much of a light on them, because I think they are beneficial to the community's culture. But we just wanted to codify sort of what we would consider sort of that exempt level. And that's kind of where we have it. If you wanted to recommend a larger size, then that's something that you could incorporate into your recommendation for the board to consider.
Chair and Commissioners, I also just want to add to what Mr. Tuttle said, because I know that there was a comment about up to maybe 400 ticket sales. I just want to clarify that these events could have up to 300 attendees per day. So if they were to sell more than 400 tickets, they wouldn't necessarily be in violation.
So there would be a 900 ticket theoretical limit in that there are 3 days and 300 people per day. Is that a proper understanding?
Chair Miller through the, excuse me, Commissioner Miller through the chair. Theoretically, yes, that wouldn't result in a violation. So I just wanted to clarify that it's up to 300 attendees.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question. Would it be possible to include a recommendation as to parking specifically, that for any of the attendees at any particular site, the parking has to be on that site's property as opposed to on the street, for example?
Just to tag on to that, does the existing set of regulations dealing with these events deal with the question of on-street versus on-site parking?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, kind of yes and no. The limit on the number of people, as well as sort of general compliance with vehicle code, parking code requirements. It does not say that all the parking has to be on site. You know, if you're in a location where there is street parking, there's nothing that would prevent someone from being able to use that street parking. Now, it wouldn't allow you to violate parking requirements along the public right-of-way or anything like that, so people can't be parking illegally. But it doesn't require that all the parking be provided on site directly.
I think I would just comment that I think if we required parking to be on site for all of these minor, small events, they would never occur. They just couldn't be accommodated. So people park in the street all the time.
Yeah, that's my sense as well, having been to a few of these art tours. Very often, they don't have any parking at all on site, and that people just, it's like a garage sale. They just park on the neighboring streets, and they won't wander over to the house where the art is being displayed. Other comments, questions? All right, we have a motion on the floor. Were you about to, no? We have a motion on the floor, and it's been seconded. Any further discussion?
No.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Also opposed.
Opposed? All right, the vote is 3-2 in favor of the motion and the recommendation of staff. Is that all for this agenda item? Anything else on this? Mr. Villalobos? No?
Just want to thank Mr. Tuttle for sitting through the heat.
So
Always, Mr. Tuttle, you are very
You've done an admirable job.
Yes. Echo Commissioner Kubiak's comments and grateful for how you professionally and thoughtfully answer my questions, and all of ours.
So unless Council or Secretary Wilson have anything else, then I believe it would just be time to adjourn.
All right.
So, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, can we just give us 1 second? We want to confirm that the action today does require just a majority vote and not a fourth-fifth vote. So we'll confirm that. And
This is not a code amendment. This is just a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors.
correct, it's a
right?
recommendation. We just want to make sure.
Okay. You want to we'll just hang out here for a moment and wait for the answer?
Can we take a 3-minute break?
I'm sorry?
3-minute break?
Sure, 5-minute break. And I join with my colleagues in thanking staff for a thorough and helpful presentation.
I will chime in on that and say that the packages that we get in preparation for these meetings are great because it has everything for us, and then the PowerPoint's a great summary, so thank you.
We're about to, Bob, we're about to reconvene. Okay. All right, we're going to reconvene the meeting of the Montecito Planning Commission, waiting for a report from staff on the voting requirement.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, thank you for indulging us in verifying the action that was taken, and we have verified that the action today only requires a majority vote. So the motion and the action stands. So it's a 3-2 vote.
All right. So the staff has reported that the motion has been approved. Is that our last agenda item for the meeting today?
Mr. Chair, that is correct, and then we will be providing information on the holiday luncheon, and we're looking for December 17th as that date.
All right, that's great. And without any further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.